I remember the morning like it was a slow-motion film playing back inside my head, frame by frame, every detail sharp yet surreal. It was the kind of morning that was supposed to be filled with hope, with relief, with the promise of a new lease on life. Instead, it turned into the kind of moment that splits your world in two: the world you knew and the one that feels utterly foreign. I was 48 years old, and for the past several years, my heart had been giving me trouble. It wasn't the kind of trouble that comes suddenly, like a heart attack, but more like a constant nagging, pressure, occasional sharp pains, shortness of breath on the simplest tasks. I'm a practical man, worked in IT for over 20 years, the kind of guy who believes in facts and solutions rather than drama and emotion. I did my due diligence, doctor's visits, tests, pills, lifestyle changes, but the verdict was clear. I needed surgery to repair a leaking valve before it worsened. That morning, I was scheduled for valve replacement surgery at St. Mary's Hospital, a place I'd been to more times than I cared to count. The white walls of the hospital room felt sterile and cold, but strangely comforting in their predictability. The nurses bustled around me, checking vitals, explaining the procedure again, making small talk to keep my nerves at bay. My wife Sarah was supposed to be there. I'd seen her walk in early, but then she slipped out without a word, said she had to take a quick phone call. I thought nothing of it. Maybe it was work, or her mother calling about the kids. As they wheeled me toward the operating room, I felt that familiar mix of anxiety and numbness. The fluorescent lights overhead were harsh, buzzing softly as I was laid down on the gurney. The anesthesiologist smiled reassuringly and said I'd be out soon and everything would be fine. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. Then my phone buzzed. I could see the screen light up. Sarah calling. I hesitated. Why now? But something inside me urged me to answer. Maybe it was the little hope that she'd show up, that she'd reassure me one last time. I tapped the screen. What happened next is a scene I'll never forget, no matter how many years pass. The image that filled my screen was unmistakable. Our living room, bathed in afternoon light. The beige couch, the chipped coffee table, the framed pictures of our family smiling from the walls. But the sight that froze my heart was Sarah. She wasn't alone. Her arms were wrapped tightly around my younger brother Louis, and their faces were inches apart. Then, shockingly, their lips met. They kissed, a long, unmistakable kiss. I could feel the color drain from my face. My breath caught in my throat. The sterile hospital air suddenly felt suffocating. Sarah broke away, her eyes locking onto the camera, her expression cold and calculating. Her voice was clear, cutting through the quiet beeping of the monitors around me. "I'm leaving you for Louis," she said, each word slow and deliberate. "He's younger and not falling apart like you, loser." The word loser echoed in my ears, louder than any machine, sharper than any scalpel that was about to cut into me. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, unable to process what I had just witnessed. It was as if the ground had disappeared beneath me, and I was falling through a void with no end. I wanted to scream, to tell her she was wrong, to remind her of the years we spent building a life together, the promises made, the struggles faced. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I forced a bitter, hollow smile. A smile not of happiness, but of grim defiance. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me completely broken. With trembling fingers, I ended the call. I set the phone down on the bedside table beside me, the screen going dark. The coldness of the room seemed to deepen, and the white walls felt like they were closing in. Nurses returned, adjusting my IV, placing the anesthesia mask in my hand. Their voices were soft, professional, but I felt miles away, trapped in a whirlwind of betrayal and disbelief. I lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling tiles, those dull square panels that seemed to stretch endlessly. I thought about Sarah and Louis, about how close I'd been to them both, about the dinners and holidays and laughs we shared. And now, in the space of a few heartbeats, all of that was shattered. A million thoughts raced through my mind. How long had this been going on? How many times had she lied to me? What had Louis said when she told him about me? Was this some kind of cruel game to hurt me while I was vulnerable? And most painful of all, how did I not see it coming? The anesthesiologist approached, gently pressing the mask over my face. I inhaled the cool, medicinal air, my body relaxing as the sedatives took hold. But even as consciousness faded, the image of that video call burned itself into my memory. I woke up hours later in the ICU, groggy, in pain, but alive, and with that image still haunting me. Because the thing is, pain is something you can prepare for. Heart surgery is terrifying, but it's a known enemy. What I wasn't ready for was the betrayal, the knife in the back from the people I love most. That sting was sharper, deeper, and far more dangerous. Yet, as I lay there, barely able to move, something inside me began to harden. Not bitterness, not despair, but a cold resolve. This wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. If Sarah and Lewis thought this was the moment that would break me, that would erase everything I was and had fought for, they were dead wrong. Because while the surgery fixed my broken heart physically, it would be the strength I found afterward, rising from the ashes of their lies, that would truly save me. Waking up from surgery always feels like surfacing from deep underwater. Your senses slowly flicker back to life, and you're overwhelmed by a wave of disorientation, discomfort, and the faint echo of anesthesia clouding your thoughts. That day was no different, except nothing in my world was the same anymore. I remember the sterile scent of the hospital room, the harsh fluorescent lights above me, and the dull beeping from machines that tracked every shallow breath and fluttering heartbeat. I felt fragile, so incredibly fragile, like my body was a cracked vessel barely holding itself together. But as fragile as I was, the moment I grabbed my phone, the calm in my mind shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. The screen was flooded with notifications, calls from unknown numbers, messages I couldn't immediately make sense of. Most unnerved me were the text messages from my bank. My heart pounded harder as I realized what I was about to see. My fingers trembled as I unlocked the banking app and tapped on our joint investment account, the one Sarah and I had painstakingly built together over more than a decade. It was the financial backbone of our family, the nest egg we had promised each other we'd nurture and protect. I thought about all the late nights we'd spent poring over budgets, trimming expenses, investing carefully, making sacrifices so our kids would have a secure future. And I thought about how, only hours ago, I'd been prepped for surgery, trusting she was watching out for things at home. Then, my stomach dropped. The balance was zero. Gone. Every penny vanished like it had never existed. My breath caught in my throat. I refreshed the page, hoping, praying it was a glitch or some kind of error. But the balance remained the same, empty, nothing. Zilch. Desperate, I scrolled down through the transaction history. What I saw made my blood run cold. There were a series of withdrawals and wire transfers. Thousands, no, hundreds of thousands of dollars moved out of our accounts over the course of that single night. Each transaction was sent to accounts I didn't recognize, mostly offshore, to places where money disappeared without a trace. There were cash withdrawals in different states, suspicious checks cashed in strange neighborhoods, and several transactions that seemed planned, deliberate, and methodical. I realized then what had happened. While I was under the surgeon's knife, unconscious and vulnerable, Sarah had been busy dismantling the life we'd built together. She had methodically emptied our accounts with the help of my own brother, Lewis, the man I'd trusted like a son, the one I had helped raise, the one who had shared every family holiday, every Christmas, every birthday. The betrayal was incomprehensible. I tried calling her immediately, fingers shaking as I dialed. No answer. Voicemail. Texts sent in a blur, asking why, begging for some explanation, but nothing came back. Then, an email from the bank manager caught my eye. Attached was a photo, and when I opened it, I nearly dropped my phone. It was a note, handwritten, scrawled hastily on a torn piece of paper, and left as a cruel signature at the last transaction. "We hope you die," it read. Those words stabbed me harder than any scalpel, cold, malicious, full of hatred. I sat back against the hospital bed's cold frame, my breath shallow and ragged. Tears welled up, but it wasn't sadness. It was rage, confusion, hurt so deep it felt like a physical wound. How could the woman I loved so deeply turn against me like this? How could she betray not just me, but the entire family? How could Lewis, who I had trusted with everything, be part of this deception? For a long time, I sat in silence, reliving every moment of our life together. The wedding vows, the nights we stayed up planning our future, the times she said she loved me. Were those all lies? Was I nothing more than a mark in their game? I thought about the months leading up to this. The subtle shifts in Sarah's behavior, her growing impatience, the late-night phone calls she quickly hushed when I entered the room, the sudden expenses she couldn't explain. I'd been so focused on my health and upcoming surgery that I ignored those warning signs. Maybe I wanted to believe the best. Maybe I was too blind or too hopeful. Louis. I had always seen him as family, almost like a son. I had supported him through tough times, helped him find work, gave him a place to stay when he was struggling. To think he had conspired against me made my stomach churn. In that moment, my world collapsed. Yet, as the initial shock faded, my mind cleared enough to realize I needed to act. This wasn't just about heartbreak or anger. This was a calculated crime, a cold, deliberate theft designed to ruin me. I knew I had to gather evidence, every bit of proof I could find. Bank statements, emails, messages, anything that would show the full scope of their treachery. I would have to fight, not just for the money, but for my dignity and my family's future. The pain was raw, but it awakened something in me, a determination I didn't know I still had. They thought I was broken, helpless, laid up in a hospital bed. But they underestimated my will. I was battered, but I was not defeated. I would rebuild, I would expose the truth, and I would make sure that no one would ever be able to hurt me or my family like this again. After I woke up from the operation, my body was weak, every breath a reminder of the ordeal I'd just survived. My chest ached, the sterile hospital smells clung to my senses, and the faint beep of the monitors was a constant soundtrack to my pain. But what weighed heaviest wasn't the physical discomfort. It was the realization that the life I thought I had, the future I had planned with Sarah, was crumbling beneath me, piece by piece. The cold kiss she planted on the screen, the words that cut deeper than any scalpel. "I'm leaving you for Louis. He's younger and not falling apart like you, loser." Haunted every moment. And worse still was the discovery that overnight she had emptied out our joint investment accounts, leaving a taunting message. "We hope you die." It was more than betrayal. It was a declaration of war. Lying in that hospital bed, I could have let the despair swallow me whole. But instead, a quiet fire ignited inside. I knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy or quick. My body needed time to heal, but my mind raced relentlessly, focused on uncovering every lie, every secret they'd buried beneath layers of deceit. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Anger was a luxury I couldn't afford. If I wanted justice, I needed proof, cold hard evidence that no one could ignore or dismiss as a bitter husband's rage. From that first morning, when the nurses changed my bandages and the sunlight peeked through the blinds, I turned my hospital room into a makeshift investigation hub. I logged into my accounts on my laptop, carefully protected by strong passwords Sarah had helped me set up years ago. Every line of transaction history told a story, one of theft, deception, and betrayal. Transfers to accounts I'd never seen before, payments disguised as routine bills, but far larger than any utility or credit card charge. Wire transfers sent to shell companies with names that made no sense. Some seemed like random combinations of letters. Others were linked to unfamiliar businesses with no real history. I printed out stacks of these documents, pages upon pages of statements and digital receipts. With a red pen in hand, I marked suspicious items, circling amounts, dates, and recipients. I filled notebooks with notes. Why this amount on this date? Could it be tied to a vacation, a hidden expense, a bribe? Every detail mattered. Every dollar unaccounted for was a clue to their plan. My fingers trembled not from weakness, but from a mix of frustration and cold calculation. I remembered every conversation with Sarah over the last year, every unexplained late-night text, every evasive answer when I asked about money. The pieces started to fit together. Late withdrawals, mysterious charges on credit cards, money moved just before and after major arguments. It was a coordinated effort, carefully planned while I was distracted by health issues. But I didn't stop there. I had access to Sarah's phone, a risk I knew I was taking, but I needed answers. I sifted through her messages, deleted texts and emails, hunting for any sign of collusion with Louis. I found cryptic exchanges, vague mentions of meetings, references to the plan and getting out clean, messages peppered with code words that made perfect sense now, calls scheduled during times she claimed to be at work, messages to unknown numbers that popped up as private or blocked. They thought their secrecy was airtight. I knew better. I dug into Louis's finances too. His accounts, once thought to be separate from the family's finances, showed odd deposits and withdrawals matching the timeline of Sarah's activities. It was clear, Louis wasn't just a bystander, he was an active participant, enjoying the spoils while I lay vulnerable in that operating room. During the long, lonely nights, when the ward was silent and my thoughts were loudest, I planned every step of what I would do when I finally left the hospital. I rehearsed how I would lay out my evidence in a way that couldn't be ignored, not as an emotional rant, but as a precise, undeniable case. I pictured the faces of Sarah and Louis, their smirks replaced by shock and disbelief as I exposed their deceit to the world. To prepare legally, I reached out quietly to an old family friend, a lawyer who had helped me with contracts and investments years ago. I called him discreetly from my hospital bed, careful to speak in low tones. We discussed my situation, the evidence I was compiling, and the legal steps I could take once I was strong enough. He promised to guide me through the process, ensuring that when I confronted them, I'd have the full weight of the law behind me. All the while, I hid this effort from the nurses, the doctors, and even visitors. I didn't want pity or premature sympathy. I wanted control. My recovery was slow, sometimes painful, but my resolve hardened. I wasn't just healing my body, I was rebuilding my life from the inside out. I reminded myself daily that this was not just about money or betrayal. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my future, and my peace of mind. And though the road ahead was uncertain and fraught with pain, I was ready. Because in those quiet hours of healing and planning, I found a strength I never knew I had. And when the time came, I would be ready to fight. The day I decided to confront Sarah and Louis was one of the most difficult and emotionally exhausting days I have ever faced. But it was necessary. After weeks of physical healing and quiet reflection, I realized the only way to truly move forward was to confront the betrayal head-on. There was no use hiding from the truth or letting anger and hurt control me anymore. I had to be the calm in the storm, the voice of reason that would cut through the lies and manipulation. I spent days planning how I would do it. I knew Sarah and Louis would come with their defenses up, ready to gaslight or deny everything. So, I prepared carefully, gathering every shred of evidence I could find, bank statements with every illicit withdrawal, screenshots of their incriminating texts, recordings of conversations I had managed to save, and the cruel note she left in our joint account that read, "We hope you die." Every document was cataloged, time-stamped, and cross-referenced. I even drafted a clear timeline to lay out their betrayal in the most undeniable way possible. On the morning of the confrontation, I sat alone in the quiet house, feeling a mix of dread and resolve. I called Sarah and Louis separately, asking them to come over for a family discussion. I didn't hint at what was coming. No threats, no accusations, just a simple request. The moment was about accountability, not spectacle. When they arrived, I could see the tension immediately. Louis tried to smile, but it was forced. Sarah carried herself with a fake confidence, like she was ready to spin whatever story she needed. I invited them into the living room, where I had neatly arranged all the evidence on the coffee table. My sister and a couple of close family friends were there for support, but I was the one who would speak. I began calmly, my voice steady but firm. This isn't about yelling or drama, it's about facts. I want to walk you through everything I've found, step by step, so there's no room for misunderstanding or excuses. I noticed their eyes flicker to the documents as I started pulling them out one by one. I explained each financial transaction, pointing out how millions had been siphoned off from our accounts over months, money they used to fund their secret lives and luxuries. I showed how Louis's name appeared in bank records connected to the transfers, and how Sarah had hidden multiple accounts under false names. I read aloud some of their text messages where they plotted their deception, their greed dripping from every word. Louis shifted uncomfortably, his confident facade cracking. "Look, he started, but I cut him off gently but firmly. "No interruptions. You'll get your chance." He swallowed hard, then tried to excuse his actions as pressure from Sarah and desperation, but his excuses sounded hollow and rehearsed. He stumbled over details, contradicted himself, and looked increasingly defeated. Sarah's face, which had been smug and almost mocking during that infamous video call, drained of color. Her eyes darted around the room, avoiding mine and the gaze of those gathered. She bit her lip and clutched her purse tightly, saying nothing. For once, the bravado was gone. It was as if the weight of undeniable truth had finally broken her. I took a breath and continued. You thought I was helpless while I was recovering, that I wouldn't notice or fight back. But I'm standing here now, stronger than ever. And this isn't just about money. It's about trust, family, and respect. You betrayed everything we built together. The room was silent except for the faint sound of my steady voice. My sister nodded slowly in agreement, and one of our family friends whispered, "It's time they faced the music." I felt a surge of support, a quiet strength that bolstered my own resolve. Sarah finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. You think you're so perfect, but we were just trying to survive. You were out of commission, and we had to do what we had to do. The words were cold, but lacked conviction. I looked her straight in the eyes and said, Survival doesn't give you the right to steal from the people who trusted you most. You broke the foundation of this family, and there are consequences. The confrontation wasn't about drama or punishment, but about reclaiming control over my life and my future. I had taken the first step toward healing, not by forgiving or forgetting, but by exposing the truth with undeniable proof. I gave Sarah and Louis a final look and said, I've already started the legal process. You won't get away with this. They left soon after, both quiet and defeated. As the door closed behind them, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for the family I had lost, but relief that I was no longer powerless. That night, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the evidence laid out before me, but for the first time, I felt a spark of hope. I was no longer the victim in this story. I was the man who stood tall, who fought back, and who would build a new future on his own terms. The days that followed the confrontation felt like living through a never-ending storm. The emotional whirlwind wasn't just mine. It affected everyone around me. Family members took sides, friendships strained, and even casual acquaintances seemed to whisper behind closed doors. It was a cold reminder of how betrayal doesn't just fracture your own world. It sends shockwaves into every corner of your life. Sarah and Louis left the house that day with nothing but the clothes on their backs. It wasn't just a physical departure. It was the end of a chapter I never wanted to read, yet now was forced to close. Watching them walk away with that arrogant look Sarah had when she thought she'd won, I knew I had survived a kind of death, but also that I was about to be reborn in ways I hadn't yet imagined. The legal battles began almost immediately. I hired a lawyer who specialized in family and financial law, someone with the grit to handle complicated cases involving fraud and embezzlement. We dove deep into the tangled mess Sarah had left behind. Joint investment accounts drained to zero, hidden transfers to secret accounts, and even some attempts to manipulate property deeds. The magnitude of their deception was staggering. I remember sitting in that sterile law office, watching the screen as they pulled transaction after transaction, some small, others massive, all tracing back to Sarah and Louis's coordinated effort to bleed me dry. But this time, I wasn't a victim. I was prepared, armed with evidence I'd painstakingly collected during my recovery. Every bank statement, every unusual email, every cryptic message Sarah left was cataloged and ready for court. The judge didn't take long to see through their lies. Sarah was ordered to return what she could, forfeiting any claim to our shared assets. Louis was cut off from the family's financial privileges and faced serious legal consequences for his involvement. That legal victory was crucial, but it was just the beginning. Taking back control of my finances was a monumental task. With the help of a trusted financial advisor, I restructured every asset, every portfolio, and every retirement account. We diversified investments, opened new accounts under layers of security, and I learned more about finance in those few months than in all the years I'd worked. I wasn't going to be blindsided again. Not by Sarah, not by Louis, not by anyone. Home, once a place of comfort, had become a battleground. The echoes of betrayal haunted every room. But slowly, I started to reclaim the space. I tore down pictures of happier times, not out of bitterness, but to clear the walls for new memories. I repainted the living room a softer shade, planted flowers in the garden I'd once ignored, and filled my days with small projects that reminded me that life, even after pain, could be beautiful. Work became a lifeline. I threw myself into my career, not just as a distraction, but as a rebuilding block for my identity. I took on new challenges, volunteered for leadership roles, and began mentoring younger colleagues who reminded me of myself before everything fell apart. Sharing my story with them, carefully, without bitterness, helped me find purpose and perspective. I saw that my resilience was inspiring others, and that realization gave me a quiet strength I hadn't known I needed. Social life was another battlefield. Friends who had once seemed distant now became pillars of support. Old friendships were rekindled, and new ones formed in places I never expected. The gym, community groups, even a book club I joined on a whim. I learned to lean on people again, to accept help when offered, and to give in return. Loneliness was still there, lurking at times, but it no longer had the power to consume me. Volunteering became a vital part of my healing process. I signed up at a local community center, working with others who had faced their own hardships. Helping them navigate their struggles made mine feel less isolating. It reminded me that everyone carries wounds, and that strength often grows from shared pain. It was humbling and empowering all at once. Financial independence and emotional healing went hand in hand. I made plans, small ones at first, like taking a solo trip to the mountains, learning how to cook again, even thinking about dating someday. It felt strange to imagine a future without Sarah in it, but also exhilarating. This was my life now, and I was determined to live it on my own terms. Looking back, the mess Sarah and Lewis left behind was devastating, but it forced me to confront my vulnerabilities and, in doing so, discover a reservoir of strength I didn't know I had. I was no longer the man broken by betrayal. I was the man forged by it, stronger, wiser, and more fiercely independent. I realized that sometimes losing everything is what it takes to find yourself. The rubble of my old life was the foundation for something new, and this time I was building something that no one could tear down. After everything, I was left alone, but finally free. I moved out, focused on rebuilding my life and finances, and surrounded myself with real friends. The betrayal hurt, but it made me stronger. Now, I'm standing on my own 2 feet, ready for whatever comes next, and no one can take that away from me.